Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on Create with Chris. I am Chris Haughey, and today we are going to be painting Mr. Mortimer Moose. And this is such a fun project. I think you're going to really enjoy it. This is a layered piece, and I have found out that painting the layered pieces are a joy. You don't have to trace the designs. Every piece is separate. You don't have to worry about getting out of the lines. So it's a super fun project to create, and it really looks nice too. So that's what it's all about. Here with me today is Lindsay Applegate, and she is manning the questions. So please take a minute. You're just dropping in to say hi and let us know where you're coming from. Again, we're glad you're here to join us. We have a lot of news today. I don't know if you noticed on the Facebook page last night, I have a new series that I just released. I've been working super hard, and it's Chris's Countdown to Christmas. And I tried to be very creative with each one of the 12 ornaments. It's the 12 Days of Christmas ornament bundle set. They are sold individually, or you can purchase the entire bundle. And we did put it together with a special price so that if you want all of them, you do get a discount on that. But each pattern comes with an ornament, so you get the pattern, the ornament, and all the instructions, color photos, line drawings, and everything. But I think you're really going to enjoy it. I made a little video. I'll go ahead and play to create, and I'm so excited to share that. Also, tomorrow is the 15th, and that is when my Design Club release comes out. This is the Joy Nativity ornament. This is another layered piece. I love how it turned out. It was because all of the shapes are in layers. Let me go back here. Let me find my spot here. My camera got a little bit. Okay, so the top layer has all of the figures on it, and then the bottom layer is the background. So you don't have to trace all these little figures, you just have to paint them. It's really, really fun to paint. So I think you're going to enjoy that as well. If you are not a member of the Design Club, if you sign up for it, you will get all 6 of this year's ornaments, which will include this one as well. Did I miss anything, Lindsay? I wanted to talk about the 12 Days of Christmas countdown. Super fun collection of very unique ornaments, and the Joy Design Club ornament. Okay, so we are ready to get started. I did give you homework on Mortimer, and that was to get all of the pieces base coated if you are painting with me today. If you are not, this is recorded so you can watch it and paint at your leisure. I'm a rather fast painter, so if you want to slow down and take your time and paint and then stop it and watch it and paint again, this is a great way to do that. And
this will be on YouTube this afternoon as well, so.
Okay, that will give you another viewing option. So if you want to, be sure when you go to YouTube to check out my Create with Chris channel, because I have a lot of fun videos there. So this is an MDF piece, and with all MDF, love these pieces. You do not have to seal it, but I always do, because even after you paint it, you'll feel a little bit of a grain raise up. So I seal it using the multi-purpose sealer. Only takes a minute. brush it on, let it dry, and then give it just a quick sand, and I use a very low grit. Actually, I use about a 220 grit sandpaper. This one was just happened to be here, but just give it a light buff. Couple reasons. That's going to always ensure that the paint will adhere well to the surface. Plus, even though it doesn't feel bad, if you have a little bit of a grain on your surface when you paint, it is very hard on your brushes. So it just provides longer life for your brushes, as well as resulting in smoother strokes. If you're trying to get a real smooth line and your surface is just a little bit textured, it just kind of creates another challenge. So it's always best to avoid as much as you can on challenges when it comes to painting. So let's go ahead and get started. I did base coat the antlers with almondine. It's just a light tan, and there's 3 shades of tan. So if you don't have exactly these colors, all you need is a dark, medium, and a light shade, and it's going to work out fine. This is kind of a monochromatic piece with the mousse, so I did drop in some extra color just to bring a little more appeal to the piece as well. I'm using light cinnamon and my awesome angle, and my angles are custom designed for me. They're wonderful brushes. I had them made just with a little more length. I want to be able, you know how you load your brush and you have it just perfect, and then you have to reload and it's hard to get it to blend in. If you have a longer bristle, you're going to end up with a longer stroke and you'll get a smoother flow. Now his little head is in the middle, so I'm just going to float from the side to the middle, and I'm not going to try to go around the whole thing. And I've dampened my brush. I'm just loading the toe into the light cinnamon, and I'm working it into the bristles. I've got quite a bit of length on the bristles, so I want to load the brush up well. The heavy paint's on the toe, and you can see it blends out very nicely. I'm going to start up here, and I'm just going to float that in. I really loaded it well, so I probably can go around to the other side. I'm telling you, it's a whale of a brush if you want to be able to get some nice floaty, long floating strokes. You need a bristle with a longer length and it'll be perfect. All right, we did everything there with one load, and I still have quite a bit left on my brush. So I'm just going to let this, scooch this over to the side and let that dry for a minute. And while I've got this on my brush, I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom of his nose as well. And probably if I hadn't talked, I would have had enough to do this. But I'm just going to float this. Now this is toffee, which is a medium shade of tan. And because it's a little bit darker, that light cinnamon float's going to be just a little bit stronger on there. So I let that set. And then I'm going to do his head as well. And just go down the side. This is fawn. And I don't know why, but because DecoArt named it fawn, I think everything that's a moose or a deer needs to be this color base coat. Now his little nose is going to sit right across the bottom. So I'm just going to float around the top. I don't have to worry about that. That's where his nose is going to be. I had trouble with my camera earlier. It just seems like it wants to drift down. Let me know if I'm going off. Okay. Going back to the antlers, and I did want to pile some snow across the top of that. I'm using my number 5 Radical Round, and this is another brush that I developed. It has a super fat belly on it and a nice sharp point. I love to paint snow because you don't have to worry about it being perfect. The snow is just going to lay on the top, and so I can do it a couple different ways. I can actually paint it on there. or I can take my brush and I just kind of roll it across the top. And just lay the paint in that way. And it goes really fast. It's very random. I'm just kind of rolling it back and forth. I have about a 45-degree angle over the edge. And remember, it's going to fall from the top down. So I want to, and I am holding the piece up. The one thing I want to be careful is that I don't get paint over the edge. And I did it on that one because I painted it. But if you roll it from the tip out to the edge, you're not going to get the paint dripping over. So, not a big deal. You can always touch the edges up, but I always like to paint with the thought in mind that I don't want to have to go back and do a lot of touch-up work. Just going to put a little more on there. Just a little bit random. I'm just going to let one coat on there for now, let it dry, and then go back and add more. Okay, I'm hopping around to let everything dry in between. Want to go ahead and get his little eyes on there, and I am using my Painter's Pal template for the eyes. And this is a template I designed. It's so very, very convenient. Just going to use that to stencil the eyes in. It's really nice. I don't know how many times I've painted one eye, and then you go to paint the other eye, and it's just a little bit bigger, and then you go back and forth. Pretty soon you have great big huge bug eyes. If you use a template, it will make perfect eyes every time. Now I can do a couple different things here. I can take my tracing paper and a stylus, and I can lay my pattern over it, and I can line it up, put my tracing paper in there, and I can trace around, make sure that it's on there. If I do trace, I always put my template down and use that to trace around. It just makes it easy because it's going to be perfect. Another thing I can do, oh, that was folded over, so I didn't get that. I'll go ahead and trace that on there. 9 times out of 10, what I will do, instead of doing the tracing by laying the pattern over it, I'll just take a white pencil and I'll just mark the center of the eyes. And that way when I put my template in there, I can just line it up on the center and create the eyes that way. Or I could put the stencil on there and trace around it with the white chalk pencil. I really like, I don't have one, the, is it the Tombow white pen or white pencil, the Soline?
Oh, the Stenciling Trio?
Yeah,
It's
the
not
Soline
Tombow,
Trio.
no, but
It's a tracing pencil. It's white, graphite, and then there's a stylus tip on it. It is super nice because when you get it wet, it just kind of disappears. So you don't have to worry about erasing those tracing lines.
we don't have them.
Oh.
It's not, that's why I'm not
Oh,
gonna say it.
okay.
Yeah, we haven't had them for, they're popular.
They're very popular.
Hopefully we get them before Christmas though, because they are.
Yeah, this would make a nice Christmas gift. So I'm using my template, my spectacular stencil brush, and another one of my designs that I worked for a very long time to get the bristles just right. I wanted a stencil brush that would be soft enough to give an airbrush effect, and yet sturdy enough that I could give an opaque fill. Also, I wanted a stencil brush I could wash out and not have to wait until it dries to add more color. So I've loaded my brush. I just got the tips on it pretty heavy, and then I brushed it over a paper towel to get the excess off. And I'm just going to tap that on there to get eye placement. 2 light coats, always much better than one heavy coat. After I get that on, I'm just going to take a paper towel and clean up my stencil real quick. Put that back on there. And another light coat. If the paint is too heavy and you're pounding it in there, it's just going to seep right under that template and you're going to get those awful raggedy edges. Now when I was designing this, I wanted to make sure, he looks kind of silly without his little nose. I wanted to make sure that his eyes and his nostrils weren't straight up and down. So I bumped the nostrils out so it gives a little more of a, it kind of breaks up that straight line. I can do the same thing with the nostrils. I can take my tracing and I put the tracing paper or graphite paper in there and I can trace it, or I can just take and put it on here and say, alrighty, I want this little nostrils right here and right here, and then I can center that up in my template. One thing about this little guy, you can raise his nose up or you could lower his nose down and he's going to look good. If you do lower it down, you might want to bump the eyes down a little bit too. And the reason I mention that, because as I was doing this, I thought if you raised his nose up a little bit more, you could put personalization down here instead of, you know, the snowflakes and the heart. You could put, still keep the heart, but maybe put a name or a year or wish or merry or jolly. You know, you could put something in there. So that gives you a lot of options on this piece. I think it makes it fun when there's simple alterations that you can make that will really change it up. So you could paint this little guy, change the color of the sweater, you could put the sayings down there. There's so many different ways that can go. Again, I use the template for the nostrils and I'm just going to take and center them. Now, I do pay attention at the distance between the outer edge. This is really a sad stylus. It's definitely bent. The distance between the edge of the stencil here and the outer edge of the...
It may or may not have been us using that stencil or that stylus.
So Lindsay and Jen have started to get very creative and they're doing some beautiful things with the door hangers. If you haven't noticed or checked out our door hangers, they are just absolutely gorgeous. So I'm so proud of them because they are actually painting. I think
It only took 10 years.
Yeah, 5 years ago they wouldn't have had a brush in their hand, but now they're getting very adventuresome. And they have a great eye for color and design, so it's really fun to see the pieces that they create. Lindsay is into ombre now, so she's put her big girl panties on and she's actually doing some pretty fancy
It's still
stuff.
terrifying. I just want you to know that.
Well,
it stresses me out.
and I'm sure many of you will say there's a lot of things about painting that terrify you too, but the stuff she's doing is beautiful. Jen's using stencils to really elevate the look of some of the... You use stencils too, don't you, Lindsay? I mean, they're just really impressing me every day.
Jen is venturing into shading. I haven't gotten that brave yet.
Yeah. And they're using they're doing a lot of pen work for design, which I think is beautiful.
Should I say where that comes from? Or am I gonna get like banished? That's a scrapbooking trick.
Oh, no. Well, and you know, if you're comfortable doing paper crafting and scrapbooking, it is kind of a big jump to go into painting. But I think they're finding out that how much fun it is. And I'm just adding a second coat just to make this a little more opaque. 2 light coats is better than 1 heavy coat. And look how nice that looks. His little nostrils are kind of bumped out. I do tilt his little eyes in just a tad. I think it makes it look kind of whimsical. I wanted, when I did this, I should keep him over here. I thought he was kind of one color, like monochromatic. and I wanted to add a little bump of color in there. So I used Whispering Turquoise just to add a hint of something. A little bit of color makes such a big difference. And I think that's my motto. I say it over and over. But on his eyes and on his nostrils, I floated a little bit of this Whispering Turquoise. You can use white, but I think the blue just kind of ramps it up a little bit. And I'm using my 1/4 inch awesome angle, and I'm just going to float that right along the bottom and the left side. And I bumped it out just a little bit. So it's just a soft float. Just that hint of color will really make a big difference. Same thing on his nostrils. Now I want to make sure I did it on the bottom right of the eyes. Same thing on the nostrils. Just a little float. Here, and a little float there. Oh, how cute. To make sure that his eyes and twinkle just a little bit more, I'm going in with my Epic Script Liner. If you need a good liner, this 18-aught Epic Script Liner, a little bit longer than a liner, shorter than a script, so it is the perfect length. Using lamp black. When I thin down soft black, it becomes just a little bit muted. Lamp black, when you thin it down, is still very strong. I think soft black becomes a little bit bluish, maybe purplish. I see tints of color. So I'm just going to add a little eyebrow. If your brush is loaded correctly, you should be able to float or do a nice long line. Those little eyelashes, I usually do 3. This one kind of dry over here. I went his eyebrows just a little heavier. I'm going to give that a second to dry, and while that's drying, I'm going back in with my stylus to add a couple highlights in the eye. When I add this little comma stroke, I can use my liner brush, but I like to go in with my stylus and dip, dot, and drag that up, and you get a perfect little comma. Dip, dot, and drag it up. Super easy, and I can always be assured it's going to come out perfect.
It is very easy. I can vouch for that. We do that too.
Did you hear that? Lindsay said, yes, that's easy. So, put a little sparkle in there. He still looks kind of goofy without his nose, but how cute is that? I did not add any highlights in his nose. I just wanted to keep that. It's not domed and glossy, so I just keep that way. I am going to go back and brighten those whoa. I just slid that over the eyes. I'm afraid I thought I smeared it, but I did not. Just going to enhance this a little bit more. Sometimes you should leave things alone. There we go.
Oh.
If it looks too dark or too deep or too black, I just wanted to bump that up just a little bit. And I always think with his facial features, let's add a little mouth in there. And I'm using lamp black for that as well. Gosh, I'm bound and determined to slide that over those highlights. And make sure my brush is loaded correctly so I can get a nice long smile. I should have grabbed my glasses. Here they are. Yes. Makes a big difference when you can see what you're doing. Okay, we'll let his mouth dry just a little bit. I want to make his facial features look like they're not on his face, but kind of like he has eye sockets and a little bit of shape to the forehead. So I'm just going to take some of that light cinnamon, shade around the outer side of his eye, and I'm gonna pull that up the inside. There's a real fine line between putting shading under his eye and putting too much. He'll look like he's feeling a little bit under the weather. Just gonna float that in there. A little bit of paint makes such a big difference. We can put some under his eyebrows just to make them like they're got that forehead on there. And same thing on his little nostrils. Just, you've got this flat area, it just adds a little bit of dimension there. Such a simple little stroke has a big effect. And we need to blend those ends out. Don't want to highlight the top edge. I'm going to bring that down just a little bit. When I float, my paint is very loose and very wet, so I can shift it around if I need to move it a little bit. I'm going to put some under his mouth because he's got his little chin that kind of sticks out. And that'll just create that little bit right under there. Got a little bit above his mouth, so I'm just going to take a clean brush, move that paint around, and give him a little bit of a, he's cute. To add his cheeks, I'm going to use my stencil brush. Another nice feature on the stencil brush, because they're so soft, it's really easy to create dry brushed effects. Just make sure it's super dry.
I can vouch for that too.
Okay, Lindsay's dry brushing. This is impressive. She's been listening to me for years. So
15 years of this. It's finally sinking in.
she said, I don't know if I could do it, but I know exactly how. She said, I've heard it all. So when I create my cheeks, I'm going to start on one side, go on the other side. Because in my mind, if you build them up at the same time, you're going to have the same intensity. Got a little highlight on there. I want his cheeks to be nice and rosy.
Because he's out in the cold.
Yeah, this is a cold day. I think that one got a little too rosy. I'm going to tone that down just a little bit. Actually, my brush was too heavy, so I'm going to just tone that down. A little bit of sandpaper, that'll be perfect. So I've got his little cheeks there, nice and rosy. Need to brighten them up. I heard my stylus roll on the floor, so okay. We'll just put, because his cheeks are nice and bright, I'm going to have a nice bright sparkle on him. So there's his little face. Let's go back and brighten this snow up on his antlers. And one thing I do is when I'm piling snow on, if I don't have it solid and heavy, it looks like layers, and I like that effect. So I can just put that on. I'm not being particularly fussy about making sure every inch has 2 coats on it. I just want to add more strength to that white. I think we spend way too much time fussing over details that don't really matter. And we're going to be doing something else to the white to enhance it, so we don't have to worry about making sure it's just a real strong flat white. We want that to be super sparkly. Okay, see, he's just coming right along here. Let's go back down to his sweater. Now, I know his nose is going to be right here, so I'm just going to push it up just a tad and put my chalk pencil line right there. So that's where it's going to be covered. I have a line here that I can shade against. Did I need to move it up a little more? I think so. I am going to bump it up just a little bit more. So, just going to take, what's nice about a chalk pencil, you just...
What is that tool you're using right now?
This is my Mono Zero eraser. It's a super fine, teeny tiny tipped eraser. It's also my best friend. You can tell I use it quite often.
That's the original one you've used, right? You
Yeah.
just refilled it?
It has refills, but if you dampen it, and I'll zoom in on this, because I painted this last night. If you dampen it and you want to remove a little spot of paint, and this, like I said, was painted last night. Can you see how it's lifted that paint up off of the, I'm right down to the bare wood. I don't know if you can see that or not. But it takes it right off. So it will remove dry paint. It doesn't matter if it's dry for a day, a week, a month, an hour, 5 minutes. It will remove dry paint. And what is really nice about it, because it's so tiny, you can really hone in that little itty bitty area. You know how you drag your hand through and you get a smudge? You're going, ah. Well, with this, you can go in and just go in that little tiny area and lift it off very easily.
And it is refillable.
Refillable. I mean, what a great tool. I have two. I have one at home and one here at work. Super convenient. I think it's a tool that helps me to relax, and it doesn't mean I get sloppy, but I know that I can fix it easily if I do have a mistake. You get paint on your hand and you smudge it over here and you're going, ah, you can just go in and touch it up. Not a big deal. Let's add some color to this sweater, and I'm using Hauser medium green and my 1/2 inch awesome angle. Just going to put it heavily around the edges. I don't float smoothly. I kind of tap it in and use the clean part of my brush to move it around. My brush is very, I call it loose with paint, so I can go back and manipulate it for quite a while before it begins to tack up. I'm just going to move that up a little bit, just in case I decide to move that nose around. But it provides almost movement with the floating. It's not a solid, smooth, flat float. And I like the way that looks. It's easy for me to apply. I just kind of lay it in. I make sure that I don't have an inside edge. Keep that heel part of my brush very clean. I can go in and move it around easily. I notice here I've got a little smudge of light cinnamon. I don't know if you can see it. Go on his little nose here. Right here. See that little smudge? I don't want that there. It's the Mono Zero is damp. I'm very lightly going over it, and voila, it's gone. How sweet. My snow is dry. Said I wanted to put a little more color in here. I am going to bump down to my 1/4 inch angle and picking up some of that whispering turquoise. This is that unexpected color that I'm adding that just creates that nice extra, to me it looks almost kind of frosty. Not doing a lot, I'm just kind of floating it along the bottom edge. And if you think that's too blue, it may be, but I'm not finished yet. A little bit of paint makes a big difference. So I'm just putting that hint of frosty undertone in it. Letting those bottom edges, excuse me, be a little bit uneven, a little bit loose, not stressful. This is not stressful painting. This is just to give a little more color to that. And I am going to give that a quick dry. And I love, if you don't have, let me go out just a little bit. I use the heated craft tool. It is a super hot dryer and it's so quiet. I think that's what I like best about it. It's very efficient and it's very quiet. Actually, I'm going to go back to my 1/2 inch angle. Pick up a little bit of light cinnamon. This is to create some depth underneath of those snow piles. So this is where I can go in and really sharpen up that bottom edge and create that little bit of depth. Such a fun way to clean up. Now I could have been super fussy about that snow on there, but I know I'm going to do this and it's going to clean it up. I'm using that heel of my toe of my brush to kind of define any areas that got a little bit too dark. These brushes are made to do amazing things. Just let them work for you and you don't have to work nearly as hard. When I do I call it my tap float, when I tap it in and float it around, sometimes I get a little jag where the float is underneath. Let me see if I, and so then I'll go back and soften that and blend it out. So I usually do it, you know, go over it a couple times, but because my brush is so loose with paint and fluid, I have a lot of open time that I can work with that. And do I have that? No, I don't. Oh, if you need more open time, I found this is like amazing. This is fast drying glaze medium. It's Joe Sonia. Whenever you see that name, you know it's a quality product. But this will allow more open time. My granddaughter is 12 and she came over to paint and I introduced her to this stuff. So she came over the weekend. She said, "Grandma, give me some of that amazing stuff." She doesn't know what it's called. But I said, "The glaze medium?" "Yeah." She said, "That is awesome." So it helps her to be able to play with the paint just a little bit longer. I'm going back now. This is dry. I'm just going to ramp up the top edge. And I could use my radical round, but I'm just kind of laying heavy paint on the top of these. It's going to mute down that blue, but not cover it up. And everybody knows white's not a super opaque color. So this is going to have just that soft glow, that iridescent blue beneath it. And it just really looks like frosty layers of snow piled up on top of his antlers. On the finished piece, I did go back. It's always so hard to show the sparkle, but I did add glamour dust on the snow. Anytime you can add glamour dust on anything, it's like, wow, that is so beautiful. Going back to the sweater, we need to deepen that green down, but I wanted to add snowflakes on there. So before I put the darker green shading on, I'm going to add the snowflakes because I want them to be kind of behind the shading, not laying on top. It looks like they're stuck on if they're put on top of the shading. What do I Got black there.
It's so weird without his nose.
It doesn't look weird without his nose. Sad little guy. Okay, he's not gonna have a nose for a bit. I did a whole line of these Painter's Pal tools. This is my Sparkle Pal. How many do we have,
I
Lindsay?
think we have 11.
Okay, the 12th one, I know what I want to do, I just haven't done it yet. Okay, I want to make sure that these are one in the middle, one on each side. So instead of starting here and going across, I'm going to do the one in the middle first. I don't like them to go straight up and down. I kind of like it to be a little bit, the tines going to the side. I know, it's, just want to get the middle. I have trouble finding the middle once I put my stencil on, it kind of throws it off. And you see I put a little dot there. I can take this and just line it up where that dot is, and I know exactly where the placement's going to be. I have loaded my stencil brush. I wiped it off a little bit on the paper towel, and I'm just going to carefully tap that in. This will have 2 coats, so I'm just getting one light, even coat in. And I'll share a little secret because I wanted to stencil one of these and I didn't want to get it on anything else. So when I put my snowflake down to stencil it, I took my Painter's Pal and I put it a circle around it, and then I could stencil, and I'm not going to get in any of these other parts because kind of sort of just masked off those outer areas with the other template. So I can layer these templates and without worrying about getting in. I'm not big on putting tape down, and if I put tape on all these little delicate snowflakes to mask them off, you run the risk when you pull it off of damaging the template. Okay, so we've got that one there. It's a little bit easier if the stencil is clean for placement, so I took a little bit, it dried while I was talking. Just took a little bit of hand sanitizer and went over that to remove that paint. Stencils are very sturdy, but you do have to keep in mind when you have all these little delicate features. Now when I'm doing this one, I want to notate the distance between here, 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 and where the other stencil is placed. And I'm worried about getting it down there. I'll show you what I'll do on my second coat. So there's that one. I'm going to wipe it off right now so I don't have to worry about it drying. And then I can take this. Also notice, these snowflakes are pretty much symmetrical, but I'm keeping my template in the same up position for every time I stencil these. That way I don't have to turn it around and get an exact match in case it's not perfect. Okay, so now that I have that on there, I'm going to add a second coat. I have a real light layer, so it does dry rather quickly. Light layers are so much better than a super heavy layer. It's just going to provide a more delicate stencil when you're finished. So I'm going to start with this one. And I don't want to get anything around that. So this is another one of my templates. I'm just going to lay that on there. See how I just scooted that up to the edge? Now I can stencil and don't have to worry about getting it over the outer edge. And I have a perfectly stenciled snowflake. Same thing here. Just have to be careful. I should take a little piece of tape and anchor it down, but I couldn't find it. Oh, wait a minute, here's a piece.
I was gonna say, it's probably on her desk.
They're snagging all my stuff. That's okay, they're being creative. I'll share. If you're juggling two templates, it's always best to just be careful to make sure they don't shift around, because you want to maintain that really sharp edge. Now I can stencil with a little more what I call confidence. Perfect, and I don't have any over stenciling anywhere. Yeah, you take a minute to find a piece of tape. I usually stick one on my camera somewhere so I have it in a pinch. Obviously, I needed it. I have not reloaded my stencil brush. I'm using the same load. This brush has a bazillion bristles. It holds a ton of paint. On the flip side, it has a bazillion stencils. It holds a ton of paint. So when you go to clean it, keep that in mind, as it will take a little more diligence to get all the paint out of the bristles. So that's dry, that's dry. Let's go to this little holly while we're waiting for everything to dry. And put his little nose back on because he is kind of strange looking without it. Once I decide where my holly placement's going to be, then I can decide where my shading's going to be. Most of the shading is along the bottom and along the left side. My highlights coming from the right. Going in with Hauser Deep Green. I do toggle between Hauser Deep Green, Dark Green. I don't know why I changed the name of it. I toggle between that and Plantation Pine, depending on what I'm doing. Just going to shade down this left side and down the center. I like to put just a little bit of a curve on that center vein. My paint's very loose. I can manipulate it until I'm happy with it. I know this base is going to have a lot of color in it. Just going to take that, put a little more down there. This is my first float. This is just to give me placement. It's hard to hang on to these little pieces if you have, who was it said, use double stick tape, that works well. At home I have a mat that kind of grabs.
Mary Jane said
Mary
that, I
Jane,
think.
yeah.
She's in here.
That's a very helpful tip. At home I have a mat so I don't have to worry about it scooching around on me. Here I kind of have to hang on to it. When you hang on to it, you kind of run into the issue, are you going to stick your finger in the floated paint? And because mine's so floaty that it's real easy to smear it around. Okay, well that's drying. We're just going to hop around a little bit. Going back to the sweater. And I'm going to deepen that shading with this Hauser Dark Green. And I want his sweater to be green, really green. And I may go back a couple times and put 2 floats on. I would rather do that, have a couple floats, than to put it on super heavy the first time and regret it. And you all know what I'm talking about. I'm just going to soften that edge down a little bit. And these, see these little straight lines? That's what my choppy float can happen sometimes. If you want to, you can just go back with a mop and soften it down that way. I usually go over it a couple times to eliminate that. But I'm gonna put his nose on, make sure everything's covered well. I don't have any spaces. I will go back and add a second coat on that.
Mary Jane said, yep, I have mine taped on cardboard again today.
Smart woman. You know, anything that makes your painting life easier is such a good idea. We do this for fun. If it's frustrating, find a solution, because that's the last thing you want, is to be frustrated with creating something that is just adorable. He's a happy little guy if he's got his nose. He needs to make sure you're happy too. Picking up a little bit of celery shoot just to brighten the other side of those holly leaves. Such a pretty color. Just gonna kind of blend it in there. Let's go with this one. This is kind of awkward to hold. Okay, we'll just do it this way. There we go. Mary Jane, you won out. And I don't know why we struggle with something when it's as simple as putting a little piece of tape down. And I can always go back and add more, because when it dries, it's not going to be quite as vivid. And I'm okay with that. There we go. I'm going to save this little guy for later, because I'm coming back. Sweater. One more float. I want it to be really, make sure it's dry. See how that just kind of sets those snowflakes back in there? Really nice. Just want to make these edges, corner edges, just a little bit stronger, so that focal point is on the snowflakes more so than that bright green sweater. I tried a couple of colors on the sweater. I thought red would be pretty, but I knew I wanted the heart to be peppermint striped, so I just flipped it to green so that I just have a little more diversity in the color.
Mary Jane said, good job using the tape.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Alrighty. On the pattern packet, you can use, I just said to use a number 2 flat to paint these stripes. And whatever size brush you have is whatever size stripe you're going to end up with. To paint a perfect stripe, make sure your brush is loaded well, and once you touch down, keep an even pressure until you get to the end, even if you run out of paint, because pressing down is just going to result in a wider stripe. Or you can use a painter's helper, which is a stencil. I think everybody has stencils. So I'm just going to make it easy on myself here. And remember that what you see that is white is going to be red. So I'm going to put this down, because I don't want that moving around on me.
And that stencil you're using is part of a stencilette set.
It is, but we have other stencils that have stripes in them. Any stripe will work as long as it's a smaller stripe. You want to definitely keep a smaller stripe on it. Okay. using watermelon slice. Loading my stencil brush. I really work the paint into my bristles so that I know I have a fair amount of paint on my brush, but I don't want that heavy paint on the tip of the brush. So I'm just going to take and wipe it over a few times to lift those little dots. And you can take a look at it. If it looks kind of fluffy and light, that's what you want. Okay, this is the challenge because this is a tiny piece and a tiny stencil. I'm just kind of tapping it on there lightly. If I tap too heavy, I'm going to move my stencil around. Because I have a white background, this watermelon slice is going to be absolutely beautiful. And I'm just going to shift my hold on that stencil here. Okay, get it lined up here. There we go. And finish this last stripe. Okay, perfect. I'm good with that. Now I can go back if I wanted to and go over it again, but I think it looks great. I don't know if you can tell, but I did sparkle. Does that show up at all, Lindsay, that sparkle?
I will let you know in 10 seconds.
It's so pretty.
It's not to that point yet.
Yeah. I did put a real fine layer of glamour dust over the heart.
I can kind of see it on the antlers, but when the antlers on the screen, I'm not sure about the heart.
To add the tiny stripes, I bumped down to deep burgundy. And the reason is when I thin out the watermelon slice, it becomes a little bit too pinkish. When I thin out deep burgundy, it lightens up and it looks almost like it's the same color. Using my Epic script liner, the 18-aught. Again, if you want to have nice little perfect lines, this is a great brush. And I should have bumped it over. As you can see, I had more room here for a couple stripes, and I don't on this one. I did realize a while back I can't talk and line at the same time. And this is going to bother me, so I'm just going to put a little bit of a like if there's another stripe there. And it's bleeding out a little bit because my brush was super wet. Not too worried about that, but I am going to clean it up a little bit right now. I just have a wet, clean brush. I'm just going to pull that off. Okay. I will let that dry just a little bit. And we'll go back to our holly berries. I just have a terrible time with circles, so I'm going to use my template for the holly berries and just pick out a size berry that's going to look good on there. And I will stencil those first. I want them nice and bright. I'm going to stencil them with white. Do you need to? No, but your berries aren't going to be real super bright. Okay. I thinned my paint down to float, and my stenciling is very loose, which is not good. So make sure, number one, that your paint is not thinned down. and that you don't have excess moisture on your brush, because those two will cause the stenciling just to have a little bit of a ragged edge on it. There's a little cut in the leaf, and I'm going to bump my berry right up to that. I still want it to be round. There we go. And you know real soon if your paint's too thin or not. I'm going to do the same thing over here. And we'll add one more here. And the size berry I used is going to cause them to overlap. I kind of like the way that looks. They wouldn't look bad white either, would they? Let's go back to my little heart here. I am going to float just a little bit of deep burgundy. I said my light source is coming from the right. So I'm just going to float a little bit of that deep burgundy down this left side. I love floating. Oh my gosh, what a huge difference. And we'll add a little bit of highlight. Down the right side. You know, this is just a little bit of a decoration, so this is good. If you want to add more shading and highlighting, nice, you could do that, but for this, not necessary. We're going to put the Glamour Dust over top of it. Glamour Dust is crystal clear, but it does mute it down just a little bit. I'm going to top coat these berries with watermelon slice. And I just give my stencil a quick wipe when after I've stenciled it. And my paint is wet, and yes, I do lay my template over it, but I don't scooch it around, so I'm not smearing my paint. If I wait until all three dry, as I layer this last one on, the overlap edges are going to be heavier and darker. So I want to stencil it while they're still wet enough before they dry so that the colors can blend together. So I have 3 berries. I will create the overlaps and the shading with shading.
Can you show how you load your brush for shading
Okay.
when you're getting ready to shade?
I am getting ready to shade my holly leaves, so we'll do that. I'm going to go out just a teensy bit. I am using my 1/4 inch, let me put my paint over here, Awesome Angle. Again, it has more length on it than a normal angle brush, so it's going to give me a longer stroke. When I load, I like to have enough paint on my brush that I'm going to be able to do a significant area before I have to reload. I don't want to have to try to blend it all in. Taking this, and I'm just loading the toe of my brush into that Hauser dark green, and I'm blending it out on my palette. So I have a nice heavy float, or heavy load on the toe. This side over here is perfectly clean. So when I float or shade, I can take and really hone in around that berry and pull that shading on up. I can manipulate that paint quite a bit before it dries. Once it starts to drag on my brush, I know I need to reload. So I have shading on this leaf, but go this way, maybe it's easier than moving my stuff around. I'm going to go right around that, and I know it's not, I'm kind of messing with the shape of the berries a little bit, but I also know when I go in to shade my berries, I'm going to be able to clean all of that up very easily. So I just want to reinforce the shading I've already done. I know it's going to be darker around these berries. So I can kind of just tuck the toe of the brush right around there and then blend it out. The heel of my brush is very clean, so I can work it out and soften it as I'm shading. Get a really nice float. I can go back. I'm going to hit it real quick to dry it. Just going to go back with a little bit of that celery shoot and just kind of brighten that up just a little bit. I liked that extra pop of color. Let me go this way here. You always handle your brush and float easier in one direction. This one I need to go that way. I don't have a lot of paint on my brush, but when I add it in, I can just zone in to really make that much, much stronger. I think I'm going to pull that tip out just a little bit. Now I can go in with deep burgundy. And I know my highlights are from the top and the left, so I can shade these berries very nicely. And don't try to do it all at once. This one's going to be in front. I can pick up just a touch of Snow White. And I don't want it to be a real strong Snow White because I still want to go back and add a highlight. But I want to kind of roundy up those berries because I know you're all looking at them going, ooh. A little bit of a round shape on them now instead of that uneven edges. So I know when I stencil and shade, you need to look at what you're doing and understand what can be easily amended with the shading and highlighting. To be super fussy about that stenciling and shading was, I don't want to say it was a waste of my time, but I knew I could ramp it up very easily with the shading. So now my berries are nice and strong. I'm going to go in with a little bit of that Snow White. And I want a tiny little comma stroke. So I just thin my paint down with a little bit of water because the thinner the paint, the tinier the stroke. And I can get a little bitty comma stroke highlight on those.
Someone asked, when you're shading, do you clean your brush each time? You need more water, but you still have paint in your brush?
The only time I clean my brush when I'm shading is if I notice that the paint travels across the entire chisel edge. Otherwise, I will just keep adding more paint. I don't use a lot of paint. And I just load the very toe of it and let the paint kind of walk across. But once it becomes too strong on the other side, if you notice, then that's when you get those little ghost lines on the inside. So you need to make sure that you kind of filter those out. Okay, I think we've got all of our pieces. I do need to do just a little bit more on those berries. I'm going to strengthen those up a little bit. I always like to go in and do something unexpected. So we got our little guy here. He looks good. I could have moved his eyes down just a little bit more, but this is okay. We had that whispering turquoise in the eyes, and I think it's always fun to reinforce that color in other areas. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of that whispering turquoise and kind of add it maybe here and there, just a little bit. Don't get too overzealous because you just want a hint of it. Just a little bit here. I'm going to put even less here. Kind of putting it in my shaded areas. A little bit on the edge. On the heart, it's going to make it look a little bit frosty, and I think that's kind of what this does a little bit as well. Just gives that little bit of frostiness to it. I want to add some to the holly leaves, but I'm going to bump down to a smaller brush. Now it won't slide because of my tape. I can pick up just a little bit of that Hauser light green first. Or Hauser dark green. I'm deepening the shading on the berries. That green's going to give it just a nice rich shading in there. Plus, I think it bounces some of the light off of the leaf onto the berry, does that make sense? Let's add a little bit of this blue here and there, not everywhere, just a touch. A little bit of paint makes a big difference, so don't go too crazy on it. And maybe a little bit there. But look how that frosts it up. Just gonna put a little bit here, here, and in there. What a difference that little bit makes. It's just amazing. So I think he is pretty much finished except for the snowfall. And I like to use, let me see here. I need to get something down so it won't make such a horrid mess. I'll just grab a couple paper towels here. Okay. I love using the splatter brush, and I'm going to go out just a little bit on this. Splatter brush has these really, if you go to the dollar store and get those 99-cent kitchen brooms, that's kind of what it feels like. But it has enough spring and body to it so that when you splatter, it just really splatters nicely. I want to, I'm going to put this down because when I splatter, I am putting the pieces together as they will be after they're glued so that I can, my splatter is not going to go. You know what? I think I'm just going to splatter them individually. I'll have better control that way. I don't like a lot of splatter on the face. I'll keep that minimal. But around here, I want that a little heavier. So if I do it before I glue it together, it would make sense. I'll have more control. Just going to, I stuck my brush in water. Just going to take the bristles, tap them straight down into the paint. And I'm tapping quite a bit, and it's just going to disperse the paint evenly across the bottom of the bristles. The thinner the paint, the bigger the splatters. The drier the paint, you're going to get that fine powder splatter. I always stand up when I splatter, and I aim it exactly. If I wanted to go here, I'm going to aim the brush right there. And then I grab the clean part, and I just pull it back and splatter. the closer you are, it's just like a shotgun. The closer you are, the smaller the pattern. The more distance you have, it's gonna cover a larger area. Because the holly is so small, I'm gonna back up and just give a nice even coat all over. And I can just kind of point it down. There we go.
And the nice thing about this thing is you don't get your fingers as
No.
covered.
Looky there,
Like
nothing
you
on
would
my
with a
fingers.
toothbrush.
Yeah. Super easy to control. You have really good control over where it's gonna land. I can hone in and just do, I'm really flipping it. Can you hear how hard I'm flipping it? I want his antlers to be super snowy. I think I want a little more on that right here. Okay, maybe a little bit right there. Okay. Now, the heart, we'll just give that a good splatter. I'm starting to lose my splatter, so I'll reload, but I've done quite a bit. It's no different than anything else. Only as much as on splatter can only be as much as there is paint on the brush. Okay. Little bit on the nose. Okay, I don't want it on his little nostrils. I'm going to take those off. I do want some here, so I'll just go in and put. I don't want a lot on his nose. Same thing for his face. I want most of it down here. What I can do is just take paper towel and cover that up. I can go crazy down here. I don't care how many times you reload your brush, always test on your palette before you splatter here. Okay. I just don't want it on his eyes. I can put a little bit. Be careful because you don't want a straight line where it stops either. And I did get some in his eyes. I don't care if you're a moose or a person, you don't want snow landing on your eyeballs. And just clean that up. So the only other thing I did, and I use a tacky glue or quick grip adhesive to glue everything together. The only thing about quick grip adhesive is the fact that it does have an odor to it, so if you are sensitive to that, just be aware.
And Jen and I use Aleene's tacky glue.
Aleene's is
And
awesome.
it's just as good,
Yes.
but it doesn't smell.
And we'll just put that on there. Okay, the only other thing I did on this, I went back and I put the crystal glamour dust on the snow on his antlers, the heart, and then I also took my template and I went back and let me put it here. I put it back in position and then I stenciled it with varnish or the sparkle glaze or the opal dust, whatever. And that's what I used to adhere the glamour dust to wherever. So I repositioned this, stenciled it, covered it with glamour dust, and add a little bit of sparkle. So I think this little guy is good to go. He turned out cute. It's just such a fun project. You can, I'm gonna put just a little more on here. I'm gonna put a little bit of that Whispering Turquoise right here. I did it on the other one. I kind of like that. Make a little bit of a frost. It's the little touches. I know you probably can't see that, but it does make a difference. So it's all these little touches that do add a little more impact. They don't have to be difficult, but you do need to take your time and pay attention to those little details that do. Somebody stuck their hand in that. Can you believe it?
Was it?
Lindsay, why did you do that? Okay, so I think we are finished with Mr. Mortimer Moose. If you have any questions, you
There you
can. Okay. If you have any questions, you can email me, chris@cdwood.com. This will be available for replay on Facebook and YouTube.
Yeah, you can see it on Facebook. It'll be uploaded to YouTube this afternoon.
Okay, so
And then we'll be back in 2 weeks with a
I
demo.
I have something fantastic and fabulous to share in a couple weeks, so keep your eyes posted for that. We've been working on this for about a year, maybe even longer, so excited to share that. It'll be great news. Anything to make your painting life easier, and this I guarantee will. So check back in a couple weeks and you'll get to see something new, fun, fabulous coming up. Don't forget the Chris's Countdown to Christmas Ornament Bundle. Be sure to check that out. If you've not signed up for the Design Club, you can sign up now and get all year. Everything will come. It does come with the pieces, the pattern, everything you need to paint those up.
Live, Facebook Live next Monday.
Oh, Facebook Live next Monday. You don't want to miss out on that. That's when we have our really, really good deals. And the girls have some super specials lined up for that. So keep posted. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, go to Cupboard Distributing, cdwood.com. Sign up for the newsletter so you won't miss out on upcoming events. We've got a lot of things coming up for the holidays that you definitely want to jump on board with. So thank you again for joining me today. I hope I provided some tips, tricks, and techniques to make your painting life a little easier and a lot more fun. And remember, a little bit of paint makes a big difference. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.